our University of Louisiana System Bridging the Divide Summer Series. Today's webinar is an introductory overview of export control at universities. Our presenter is Dr. Robin Broussard, Director of the Office of Research Integrity at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. In her role, Dr. Broussard assists university research community with compliance to federal and state export control guidance. Additionally, Dr. Broussard oversees policy development, training, and other areas for the several committees that she serves on, namely the Institution Care and Use Committee, Biosafety, Radiation Safety, and Export Control Compliance. Dr. Broussard is well-versed in regulation requirements that impact researchers and actively assists them in navigating the requirements that impact their areas of research. If you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A and we will answer them as we go through this presentation. So at this time, I turn it over to Dr. Robin Broussard.
Thank you, Cheryl. I am so glad to be here today. Just to give you a little bit of understanding of where I come from, I did get my undergraduate and graduate degree both from UL Lafayette, and I went off and did research in the cancer realm. It was basic research working with MD Anderson Cancer Center. And then when I needed to come back home, I came over here and got a job with the university working on regulations and compliance, mainly for IACUC, but found out that we needed to expand that for other research committees. And as I was doing that over the years, I've been here since 2008, we discovered that there was a real need for looking at export controls. And so I've been delving into this probably for the last 5 or 6 years. So I am by no means an expert. I've taken a 1-week training course. I sat for the certification and passed both the EAR and ITAR certifications. And I've in general been trying my best to keep on top of things, which this is an ever-evolving area. If you pay attention to the news at all, you'll hear about export controls regularly. It's when we start talking about, oh, that US company, they gave away all their technology to China. That's export controls. And the US is looking at ways to get a better hold of it. And unfortunately for universities, we have come under their magnifying glass of late because they're finding that a lot of our technology is being lost through universities. That doesn't mean everyone is doing it, but it does mean that we need to do a better job of trying to keep track. So hopefully I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview, what is it about and what can you do to help, the US government keep control of our technology. So, and please feel free to interrupt with questions whenever you need to. Let me see here. There we go. Okay, so first, what are export controls? They are a group of laws, regulations, and sanctions. Some of this comes from Congress. Some of this comes from the various agencies that are empowered to oversee it. Some of it comes from executive order from the president. And all of this is put together under the umbrella of export controls. They're designed to do several things. We want to prevent our adversaries from getting our technology and using it against us. We also want to protect our economy. Our technology, when we use it here, allows us to make money. When other countries get our technology and use it in their countries where they pay people less money, they are then making the benefit off of our technology, and we're not able to sell them the goods and services that we normally could because they've already got our technology. So protecting our economy is very important. It also is there to help limit the production of weapons of mass destruction. Obviously, those are technological things. So we're trying to limit that within the world because Lord knows nobody wants World War III. So who's impacted by them? Believe it or not, everyone on campus. Administrators, faculty, staff, students, They all can be impacted by export controls. So you might think this is not quite a big deal. It's just some regulations. What are they going to do if I violate it? Nobody's going to find out. Might just get a slap on the wrist. Well, if they do find out, it is a big deal. Individuals and institutions can be fined or criminally prosecuted. And those fines can be up to $300,000 per violation. So if you share some technology with a foreign person who's from one of our adversary countries, and oops, I didn't know, or oops, I forgot to check, they can still come back and fine us for every instance of technology that you shared with that person, times 300,000. Or if they decide that there is a transactional value there, up to 2 times the value of the transaction. Criminal penalties can be up to 30 years in prison. There was a very famous case of a physics professor, and I'm not recalling I think he was in Tennessee, who accessed some information while he was in China going to a conference. He accessed his information back here in the US. He was emailing back and forth with his lab. It was decided that that was an export control violation. He went to prison. There was some more details in there with that, but it's one of those things that you want to be very careful of. And it can also lead to a loss of export privileges. So you might say, well, we don't export anything. We don't send anything to foreign countries. Do you ever have to send equipment with one of your researchers when they go to a foreign country? Say maybe they need to take a laptop into Iran to do some survey work. They want to see how women are being treated in Iran, and they want to take their laptop. That's an export. So you would lose the privilege to do that. So it can be pretty serious, and it does take a little bit of work to avoid it, but it's not really worth violating it. It's one of those things where it's worth taking some action to prevent a violation. So how do you avoid violating? Well, my recommendation is always consult someone knowledgeable in the export control field. And I understand not every university is going to have that option. You may not have someone who's definitely listed as an export control officer. If you have any legal counsel at your university, they would be able to help. I don't know if we have someone specifically at the system that can help. I'm offering my, my contact information is at the end of this webinar. So reach out. If you feel like you've got something where you need to talk to someone, go ahead and reach out with me. If I don't know the answer, I have a listserv that I can ask. And we have a lot of very knowledgeable people on there. We have people who have JDs that all they do is export controls. So I have a lot of resources where we can find an answer for you. But I recommend that you definitely do not share anything that is considered technology or technical data. Don't offer your services to a non-US person. Be careful about traveling to foreign countries. There's a lot of information on the agency websites, and I'm going to give you some contact information for them where you can look up and see, are there any embargoes about this country that I want to go to? Is there anything that I should not be taking with me? Be careful about hiring foreign people. Are they coming from a country of concern? We have a short list of countries of concern, but that long list is also something that needs to be looked at, and it's always changing, always changing. Enrolling students from countries of concern, we're finding that that is going to be a problem. We have some new legislation, the Higher Education Security Act, that everyone is working through right now. Procuring items from new vendors, you have to check and see, is that vendor on the restricted party list? You might say, oh, it's a US vendor, no big deal. US vendors can be restricted parties because they have violated the export control laws themselves. And you could still possibly do business with them, but you might need to get a license to do that business. And the biggest thing is to have appropriate policies and procedures in place. Look at what your risks are at your university. What kind of policy should you have in order to make sure that you don't violate any of the export control laws? So UL system does have a policy, I know that much. And I've given you a link to the policy. They adopted this policy in 2009. It contains a list of important definitions. Things like what's a deemed export? What is an export? Foreign nationals, how do you define fundamental research? How do you define technology? All those definitions are in there. They also restate the purpose of the regulations. We are trying to prevent our goods and technology from going to our adversaries. We are trying to prevent proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And we are trying to advance the US foreign policy, protect our economy. So these are all within the policy. The policy also requires all institutions to assess their risks and develop appropriate policies and procedures. The thing that you have to remember is we can't always say, oh, we all do fundamental research. It's no big deal. We are excluded. Not everything falls within the fundamental research realm. You can't say that procuring an item is part of fundamental research. Travel to a foreign country may not be considered part of fundamental research. So not all activities fall within this exclusion. And that's why you have to be careful and look at what might be involved. Okay, so there's 3 main departments in the US government that are involved with export controls. This is the Department of Commerce, and these are hot links. And I did give Cheryl and Ann a PDF of this where the hot links are active. So you'll have that at your disposal. Those hot links, as long as the government doesn't change them, they'll be good. Commerce is important for overseeing dual use items and commercial items. Dual use means this is an item that we might be able to go and buy in the grocery store or at Walmart or at Best Buy, but it's something that might also be used by the military. Maybe you're not buying that at the grocery store, but some grocery stores have got some pretty interesting content. The US Department of State, they have the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls. They're overseeing all of the military items. Okay. And then we have US Department of Treasury, where we see the Office of Foreign Assets Control. A lot of people call them OFAC. These are the people who are giving us the embargoes. They see a country that does something bad. Often the president's directives will come through Office of Foreign Asset Control. He'll say, oh, Sudan, you're doing something really bad to your people over there. We're going to put an embargo on X, Y, and Z. It doesn't necessarily mean the entire country is embargoed. Doesn't mean all the people in the country are embargoed. It could be a very specific small segment of the population. In Venezuela, the Maduro regime is embargoed, but the general Venezuelan population is not. So every embargo is a little bit different. And you have to be very careful when you're looking at these things. You can't just say, oh, we can't go there because there's an embargo. No, there's a very specific item that is embargoed, but you're still allowed to travel there. It's very complex, which is why I recommend that we all have somebody who they can talk to about it. The list of countries is constantly changing. We can't give you a list and say, this list is good forever. This list is, I can't even give you a list and say this list would be good for 2 weeks. It changes that often. Okay, so the regulations, I'm giving you more hot links for the regulations. If you are one of those people who tends to have insomnia and you can't sleep at night, I highly recommend reading the regulations. If that's not your problem, you don't have to read them. You can find someone else who's knowledgeable in it, who has read it, who understands how to read it. They are very complicated. There's a lot of twists and turns, and you read this and then it's got a note and the note refers to something over here and there, and it's a pain in the butt. I don't recommend that faculty and staff go and read these unless it's your job. But I'm giving you the links in case you want to take a look at them. They are very complex. And they're here for, we call this BIS, Bureau of Industry and Security, Directorate of Defense Trade Controls. It's much easier to say DDTC. You probably won't need these unless you have someone who is doing a project that the military might be interested in. And the Office of Foreign Asset Controls, this is one that I highly recommend. This actually, if you go to their website, is very readable. They have a lot of stuff, a lot of information about embargoes that can affect foreign travel. So this is one that probably most of our universities, if you have faculty traveling to foreign countries, you should become familiar with their website. Okay. So now I want to show you some examples of what exports are, because it's not just sending things outside the US. It's also hand carrying items. Hand carrying items like your smartphone and your computer and your tablet PC. A lot of countries that's fine for. Don't do it if you're going to Iran. It's not a possibility unless you have a license to do it. Sending email outside the US can be an export. Depends on what the country is and what you're talking about. Accessing your technology files while you're in a foreign country. That was our first faculty member that got in trouble. Not here at UL, but the faculty member was in Tennessee, but this was the first case brought against a faculty member. They accessed technology files while they were in a foreign country. Those foreign countries, a lot of them that want to overcome the US will try to intercede, or they'll intercept your emails. They will, anything that you send through their systems, they're getting that information. It's not private. That's why you really should be very careful about sending emails when you're in a foreign country or even to a foreign country. At the very basic level of being university personnel, being faculty, we all believe in the universal goal of working together to move people forward in the ability to care for themselves and care for the world. But there are governments in the world that do not see it that way. And that's what we're mainly concerned with. We're not telling you to be afraid of the people that you work with. We have to look out for what their governments might be doing. Storing your technical data in a foreign cloud. If you have data that is considered controlled, something that maybe the Department of Defense is interested in, or the Department of Energy, you have to be careful where the cloud is before you put your data there. There are a lot of American-only clouds that you can store your data in. And that's one of those fine print things that you have to look for in the contract before you start storing data there. A lot of the stuff that universities are using is actually American made, but if you have a professor who maybe has their own, what do they call it, box or Dropbox, or they're setting up, a lot of times professors will find freeware things to use. And the clouds for those freewares are not always in the best places. So that's something to be careful of. Sharing your technical data, technology, your source code for your software with a foreign person in the US can be a deemed export. Because the government looks at it as, okay, even though the person is here in the US, they still communicate with people in their home country. And so they are deeming it to be an export to that home country. So you have to be careful about who could possibly gain access to that information because of where they are from or who they may be communicating with. We don't always know what's going on in the background of people's lives and what control their home government might have over them in order for them to try and be here in the US and do the work that they want to do. It's not a fun thing to think about. Unfortunately, in the job that I'm in, I get paid to think about these types of things. And I hope that it doesn't happen to any of the people that we get to work with. Everybody within themselves, I'm sure, are good people who are trying to do the best for their own families and for their jobs and for their universities. So it's just one of those things that because the government knows there have been a few cases where things have gone to the foreign country, now we all have to be careful of it. Providing a tour of your lab, if you have any technology, especially Department of Defense type technology, things that could be used in a defense manner, depending on the information you share, that can be an export that needs to be taken care of carefully. We might need to get a license for it. Some countries, because of the embargoes, they have payments, funding, sponsorship to the foreign country or from the foreign country. That might require a license. If we're sending payments to people in Iran because they gave us a webinar or a seminar, that is something that might be export controlled because we're sending funding to a foreign country. I know this is a lot. It's like, wait, what?
Robin, a question regarding storing information in a foreign cloud. How can, or is there a way that the university can police the storing of information in a foreign cloud, especially if the researcher is using the university's servers or computer systems? Is there a way, or do you have any suggestions on how the university can police that situation?
Your university IT department should be looking into where that cloud is located. Are all of the storage areas actually within the physical US? The IT department should be in charge of that. They should only be providing access to ones that are within the US. So if that's the case, then you really have nothing to worry about as long as everyone is using the university provided cloud. It's when they go rogue on us.
Right.
I don't want to use this one. And we know they do it sometimes. They came from another place. Maybe they even came from industry and they're still using their old industry cloud. We need to advise them to please use our university sanctioned clouds. Our IT departments should be checking to make sure that those university sanctioned clouds are within the US. I have a database for all of our compliance committees where we do approval routing. And the one thing that I made sure of was, okay, where is all of this information being stored? Where are the databases located? What states? Are there any in foreign countries? And there were not. There were in 3 different states. And our main goal there was to make sure that if one region of the country was impacted by a hurricane, we could still access that information because it was stored also in another state that was not being impacted by the hurricane. So there's a lot of reasons why you want to know where your cloud is and know that it's secure and it has backups that will be available even if there's a negative impact in another area. So they should be watching that. You can ask them. So some people might say, well, who is a foreign person? We have a lot of people who are from foreign countries that work at our universities. A foreign person is specifically someone who does not have US citizenship, is not a lawful permanent resident, a green card holder. If you're a green card holder, you are considered a US person. And there's one other category that a lot of people are not aware of. There's a small group of people who have been granted asylum. They are a protected group. They are also considered a US person. So you would not include them in the foreign person category. The thing that we have to also be aware of is in the various types of regulations, depending on which one you're looking at, they look at foreign countries differently. So with the EAR, they're looking at what was your most recent country of origin or of citizenship, I should say. So it could be someone who was born in Syria immigrated to Germany and became a German citizen, and now they've come to the US to work. We don't care that they came from Syria when it pertains to the EAR. According to the ITAR, which is all defense related, we do care about that Syrian citizenship. They look at all countries that person has gone through where they maintained citizenship. So again, there we have differences depending on the regulations. The other thing that I want to point out is when we're talking about the regulations, foreign person, they use foreign person all through the regulations. If you take time to go read them, you see foreign person, foreign person. That includes corporations, businesses, partnerships, international organizations, any division of a foreign government. They're basically using the word person like an entity. It doesn't mean a human being. Okay. Let's see, what do we have next? Okay, so there's two key terms that we keep talking about for export controls: technology and technical data. They're kind of the same, but they're different because of how the EAR and the ITAR look at them. And they have very specific things, pieces of information that are necessary in order to call it technology. And we talk about a release of technology, being you're giving technical information to someone, or you're giving technical data. The important differences are that technical data for ITAR includes design. So any information that you might have to design this new item, this new thing, this new software, any of your design characteristics are included there. They also include testing or modification. So information that you might need to test a piece of equipment or to test your software. What kinds of inputs do you need in order to test a software appropriately? All of that information is considered technical data. You can't say that it's not, according to ITAR. For the EAR, they have a very specific definition of use. Usually when we think of the word use, oh, I'm going to go use the coffee pot to make some coffee. That's not the definition that's in the regulations. When they use the term use here, it means not just the operation of the coffee pot, but all the information you need to install it, all the information you need to maintain it, all the information you need to repair it, to overhaul it, and refurbish it. So when you say you're using your coffee pot, that's not the same word use in the EAR regulations, because most of us don't know how to repair, overhaul, or refurbish a coffee pot. Does that make sense? Sort of. So we have to be very careful about our terminology. And you see, I have a link down here for software, specifically for the ITAR. I can't give you one specific link for the EAR because every item that's listed in the Commerce Control List has a section on software. There's software throughout the entire thing. The Commerce Control List is huge. You cannot carry it around in your back pocket. The ITAR book is small. I can carry it around in my back pocket. So let's see. What do I have next? Fundamental research exclusion. So if you talk to people about export controls, a lot of times you'll hear them say, oh, it falls under fundamental research exclusion. And this was something that made me very happy at first when I first heard about this. But then I realized that not everything falls here. So fundamental research exclusion means if you're going to publish this, if you intend to publish this, and you have nobody saying that the information is proprietary, like a company that says, hey, we're interested in this. And even though you intend to publish it, we want you to hold off for 2 years because we want to help you with development and design and getting this to market type thing. That means it's now become proprietary. You can't publish it when you're intending to publish it. Or you can also have US government saying, no, we really like this idea of yours. Don't publish it because we want to use it for our military purposes or energy purposes. And you might say, oh, but they'll never find out about it. Well, if you applied for a patent, they will. Usually we think of applying for a patent as publishing a piece of information, so that means you're under fundamental research exclusion. But when they review all those patents, the government can then come back and say, wait, we want this information. We're blocking access to it now, and it's now become a controlled project. Also, fundamental research exclusion applies only to the technical data and information. It does not apply to objects. It doesn't apply to pieces of equipment. It doesn't, anything that is physical. So if you're building something new and cool, that object itself could be controlled, even though the research to produce it is not. I know it gets really crazy. And this is the type of thing that makes me want to pull my hair out. And because of this thing where the government can come in and look at your project and say, hey, we like this, we want to use it, which is great. Yay, because you're going to get government contracts, you're going to get DoD contracts. It also means that your fundamental research exclusion is not permanent, because they can come in. You could have people from 3 different countries helping you work on this project while it is fundamental research. And then the government comes in and says, hey, we saw this, we liked it, we like your patent, we're going to say we want to use this, so now you can't publish, you can't do any. That then makes the project export controlled. And now you need a license for all 3 of your foreign people to work on the project. It gets complicated. Not always fun.
So Robin, question.
Hmm?
Back to that previous slide. So
Sure.
if that happens, let's say we have this project and we have US researcher, 2 foreign researchers working on the particular project.
Mhm.
And it's a federally funded project, and the government comes in and says, hey, we want to do something with that. It looks good. At what point are they coming in saying this? Is this when you're submitting maybe an annual report or quarterly report, or just talking with the program manager? So at what point typically, or have you seen that this takes place?
It's usually taking place when people apply for patents. It
Okay,
could
at the
take
patent
place.
phase. Okay.
It could take place when they're filing their reports. It depends, I would think, on the detail that you're putting into those reports. The thing that you have to also remember is that it's controlled from that point on. So it does not mean that, oops, those 3 people, those 2 people who were working on it before, now we have a violation. No, you didn't have a violation there. It was fundamental research. That was our intent. That was always our intent. And we always intended to publish this. It just means from that point on, when they tell you they want to take control of that information, then it is controlled. And if you want to continue having those foreign persons working on the project, you need to look at it and see, do I need a license for these people to work on it? You might not, depending on what country they're from.
And so you said when it's in the patent phase. So is that when the patent examiner is reviewing that particular information that you submitted for the patent? Is he the person or she the person, or they looking at it? Are those, how is that how it goes? So people will be aware that may not have knowledge about this.
When you submit a patent, that patent is looked at by all the federal agencies. Everybody looks at it. Department of Energy, Department of Defense. It's not just in the patent office. All the agencies will have an opportunity to look at it. So it may not be immediate. I don't know how quickly those people actually look at things that are submitted. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. I was taking myself off of mute. Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so licenses. These are what allow us to continue doing the work we want to do with the people we want to do it with. BIS, DDTC, OFAC, they all issue licenses. You might need a license from one, you might need a license from all three. It depends on the project, it depends on the people, it depends on the countries they are from. So unfortunately, there's no easy answer there. It will, if you are granted a license, it will allow them to work on the project. The thing that you have to be very careful of is you have to put in the application exactly what they will be doing, exactly what they need access to, exactly why they are important to your project, why you can't have someone who's an American work on it. These types of things. Depending on the complexity, depending on the country of origin, it could take a couple of weeks to 6 months to get a response from the agency about whether or not you can get a license for that person. There are a few countries where we can assume that there's a general denial of license. Iran tends to fall there. I'm trying to think. I think right now Russia would be a general denial. Prior to the Ukraine war, we needed licenses for some petroleum work with Russia. Now, pretty much everything is just a general denial. I think Belarus has been pulled in there to a little bit. So depending on what's going on in the world and what countries are involved, you may or may not get the license that you're asking for. There are some things that we call general licenses. Those general licenses are actually written into the regulations. And so we can go and look them up and read them and say, oh, okay, so for Iran, while we're not allowed to do any nuclear energy work with them, we can allow their students to come and study because there's a general license G that allows for educational interactions. But there's some limitations. So you have to be very careful about how you're using those general licenses. And I recommend that we document everything, anything that you're doing. If you look up a regulation and it says, oh, well, we can do this, write it down. This is why we're doing this. This is the people involved. This is the day we made this decision. Everything, write it down. Because if something happens in the future and the government comes in and says, hey, we want to look into this, you need to be able to show them why you did what you did and what was your thought process. Having an incorrect thought process, but one that maybe was logical, is more forgivable than one that's not documented at all. Let me see, what else do we have on here? There's no guarantee that you're going to be granted a specific license. It's just one of those things that's, you might get it, you might not get it. The other thing that you'll also find with licenses is sometimes, and I've had this happen to me, I thought for sure we needed to get a license in order to have a contract for a couple of our researchers. And when I submitted it, I got a letter back saying no license required. I was over interpreting the regulations. So in that, you keep that letter because that's your get out of jail free. Hey, I got a letter from you that says I didn't need a license. Another thing that we can use to help with export controls is technology control plans. So if you have a license for foreign persons to work on projects, or maybe you have a project that has a lot of controlled equipment or controlled data, and you have foreign people working in your lab who are not allowed to have access to it. In both of those cases, you should have a technology control plan where we document what are the controlled items. Is it technology? Is it data? Is it equipment? Who can have access to it? Who cannot have access to it? How are we controlling that access? Do we have key card access to the room, or are we just putting a black sheet over it anytime that person's in the room? What are the methods for documenting your access? You need to also document that people have been trained on this technology control plan. So we recommend that everyone who reads it and is trained on it signs it, because that's your proof that they know about this technology control plan. You need to document when you plan on reporting about this. A lot of universities would like to have an annual report. How is your technology control plan going? Who had access to that piece of equipment? What day did they have access? When did they use it? How long did they use it? All of that type of information is things that you would expect to have in a report. And you also want to know who has ultimate control over the project. Who is the PI in charge? Let me see. I think that's everything I wanted to tell you about technology control plans. So on the next few slides, we are going to look at some examples of things that are affected by export controls. And we are running short on time, so I'll try and go through this pretty quickly. So hiring, background checks, we already do that. Most universities are doing background checks. They may not be doing a restricted party screening. There is software that can help you do that. And I can help you point anyone in a direction they need to for that. You need to look at the type of work or research the person may be using and whether or not that research would be considered export controlled because of their country of origin. It's usually not a problem. In my view, from what I've seen, most times we don't have a problem there. Full-time employees, they can be exempt from some of these problems. When it comes to universities allowing export controlled information to be shared with them. The problem is our faculty are not considered full-time employees. If they have a 9-month contract, the government does not consider that a full-time employee because they can go somewhere else to work in the summer and you don't know where they're going, what information they're taking with them. So if they're working on export controlled items and they're from a country of concern, we might have to look into getting them a license to allow them to do the work. Temporary graduate students and postdocs definitely are not considered full-time employees for export controls purposes. Having tours of your lab, it depends on the amount of information you're giving out and what types of things they're viewing while they're touring. So that's one of those things where it depends. There's a lot of it depends in export controls. Online education, this is something that some of y'all may have been bumping up against. Your delivery platform may tell you that we can't provide services to certain countries. Right now, I know for sure the Crimea region in Ukraine, they cannot provide distance learning to. That's embargoed. There's no technology going there. You might have certain topics restricted. I referred to this earlier. For Iranian students, if they are in Iran taking online classes, they are restricted to only undergraduate courses in humanities, social sciences, law, or business. If those courses of study require some introductory math or science, they're allowed to take those, but it has to be 100 or 200 level. It can't be 300 and 400 level. Definitely no graduate level. So, and that's when they're in Iran. If they're not in Iran, if they're here in the US taking their courses of study and they want to sign up for online courses, no problem, because they're here resident within the US. You see, these regulations are extremely complicated. There's no easy way to think about this. Online delivery, if you're talking about an unpublished research project, even though you're intending to publish, you got to be careful because some of that information you're handing out might be considered controlled depending on who's listening to it. So we don't recommend talking about your unpublished research in your classes. Other activities, procurement. Some professors, I mean, we have some that like to go look at animals at night and they might be using night vision goggles, or maybe they're using a high-speed camera to capture things. Depending on what version they bought, that could be controlled either by the ITAR, which is military, or by the EAR, which is not military. You need to be careful about what they're ordering. Some pieces of equipment may come with something called an end user statement. If that happens, you have to be very careful about which foreign persons, or if you allow foreign persons to use the piece of equipment, because that could be considered an export. You also need to be careful in procurement about suppliers. The supplier could be a restricted party that you shouldn't be buying from, or that you might need a license to purchase from. And that even includes US people. US companies can be restricted parties. Let's see, providing professional services. So you might want to consult with people on a research project, and you're going to a foreign country. Maybe they asked you to come over and help them with their project. Depending on the country, that could be prohibited. You may just be going over there because you want to distribute surveys or get people, general opinions from people in the population. So you're going to go survey the population to find out something that seems relatively benign. Are women in Iran allowed to walk on the street by themselves? Or, anything that might seem benign to us because of the country you're going to. Our US government considers that a service, because then you would be taking that information and publishing it and making it available to everyone, including the people in Iran. And we are not allowed to provide that kind of service to people in Iran. So we have had people, not here at this university, but I've heard the story where other universities have asked for permission for researchers to go do surveys in Iran. They were not allowed because it is considered a service. So you have to be very careful about what country you're going to. MOUs, data use agreements, contracts, these all frequently have export control clauses in them. And that can cause you to have to be very careful about who is allowed to work on the project, or whether or not you have to get a license for them to work on that project. So that's something you need to look at carefully. Sometimes you can get those clauses reduced or removed if it's not pertinent to the type of work that's being done. Collaborations with visiting scientists or visiting scholars, these are things that should be evaluated carefully. Check and see, why are they offering to work for you for free? Are there sanctions that are preventing them from being paid? Could it be possible that their government is paying them to relay information back to the government? Is their country of origin sanctioned? Are they themselves a restricted party? Are they working at an institution that's considered a restricted party? And then also look at any technology, technical data they would have access to. And is there any software or equipment that has end user restrictions? These are all things that you can look at. And a lot of times you can mitigate it by getting a license, but then you have to notify your PI that, okay, based on what I'm reading in the regulations, I need to get a license for this person to come and do this work here. It's going to take me 6 months to get you a license. So you're going to have to tell that person they have to wait 6 months. Are they willing to wait? Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And unfortunately, that's what we have to deal with when we're doing export controls. Attending conferences, also considered to be very benign, but if that foreign party wants to pay you, you may or may not need a license. Attending a conference might even require a license. If it's a conference where it's an invitation only, if it's one that's open to everyone, general public, there's usually not an issue. But if it's an invitation only conference in a foreign country, be careful. Look at those carefully and see if you might need to get a license. Make sure the country does not have any type of embargo against it. International travel, we tell people be very careful here. Make sure you don't need a license to do the travel. If you're traveling with equipment, you might need something called a carnet. This is basically a passport for the piece of equipment that you're traveling with. They cost a small bit of money, but they're good for a whole year as long as you take that information, or you take the equipment with you and you bring it back. Also be careful about taking any data with you. We don't recommend taking data to a foreign country because there's a very good chance that depending on what country you're going to, your computer could be confiscated and you lose your primary data. Even if you've got a duplicate copy at home, now that foreign country has your primary data. So it's not really yours anymore. Downloading from the cloud, we've already talked about that. Another thing, though, that some people may not be aware of is some foreign countries require you to use their SIM card in your cell phone. And when they do that, that SIM card can also put malware into your device. So that's another thing that they're telling us to caution our travelers about. Be very careful. You might want to consider, depending on which country it is again, taking a burner phone. Get one of those cheap ones from Walmart. Give people who need it the number to the burner phone, and then you don't have to worry about it. Document, 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 document. This is your saving grace. Always keep documentation about what you've done. What were your thought processes? Which licenses were used? What persons were involved? Dates, activities, tours. Keep track of everything. That's your saving grace. And here is a list of resources. These are all hot links for you. You can pretty much get a lot. There's a lot of really good training available here. Some of this you would have to pay for. Export Compliance Training Institute, they offer a 1-week university specific export control training. And then after you finish that, you can also pay an extra fee to sit for the certification. These people are really good at what they do. They offer some really good training. But each of the agencies have got a lot of really good information available. Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative. This is a subscription service for trainings. They have got a lot of really good trainings that are university centric. We use that here at UL. I like it a lot. The Association of University Export Control Officers, they have a website with some good information on it. They're constantly building the information that's on there, and all of that is easy, free access. Visual Compliance is software you can use. You have to pay for this. You could use this to do restricted party screenings. And then, of course, I gave you our export control website. It's really very basic, but if you want to get an idea of what you can look for, or even just, use it as a reference, it's there for you. And with that, I can take any more questions. Always feel free to reach out to me. I am not the export control expert, but I do know a lot of people who are, and I'm always willing to help out and get you information if it makes your day easier.
Robin, thank you. From your presentation, this is a much needed refresher and or all-out training for our faculty, staff, and students that are engaged in grantsmanship at our sister and system schools. So I want to backtrack a little bit on a couple of questions that came in late. So one of the questions I asked, let's see, it looks like the difference between EAR and ITAR. Is it safe to say that EAR is applicable to research, creative and scholarly activities, and ITAR is specific to defense-related activities?
Sort of.
Okay.
There is research. We have some research here at UL that actually is defense-related.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of basic research would be dealing with the EAR regulations. And that's just because most of our research is not really defense related, but there is some that is defense related.
Okay, next, when you spoke of the vendors on the restricted party list,
Mhm.
does our purchasing offices have this list or some type of access to this particular list?
I don't know. You will have
Okay.
to ask them. I
So-
know here at UL, we have an export control compliance committee, and
Okay.
our head of purchasing is on that committee. And but every purchasing office probably has their own procedures that they go through, and I really don't know what they are doing to check their vendors.
Okay, I think they wanted to know basically if there's a list, is there a list that vendors use, like a set general list, perhaps, or something of that nature?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let's see, I thought I had one other that came late. You mentioned something about transactional value. I think that was in the early part. Can you expound on transactional value?
Okay, so that was in reference to whether or not you would be fined a certain amount
Right.
for an export transaction. So that mainly is going to apply to companies that are sending items of value out. And a university, I suppose if a university sent scholarships to a foreign country that they were not allowed to send them to in order for students to attend university, that value of that scholarship would be your transactional value. And they can fine you twice that amount. For the most part, I don't see universities getting in trouble in that manner, because most of our exports is due to emails, sharing of technology, sharing of technical data. Maybe, I suppose there could be a researcher that has excess equipment in their lab and they've decided they're going to send it to a colleague in a foreign country that doesn't have a lot of money for equipment. And so they're getting rid of something that would have gone to the surplus and been thrown away. But to this other researcher, it is extremely valuable because they don't have it. Whatever the value of that item that is sent, if it's sent to a country where we would need an export license and you do it without the license, that would be a violation. And then they could fine you twice the value of that piece of equipment. That would be the transactional value.
Okay. Last question. It's regarding the technology control plan.
Mhm.
Is the plan institution-wide or is it project specific?
It is very project specific. You can come up with a template for one, but it would require a lot of fill in the blanks for all of the detailed information that needs to be in there. It's very project specific. It could be laboratory specific. If a laboratory has a piece of equipment, maybe you have a center laboratory that's got something that's even a shared piece of equipment where multiple PIs are using it. So it could be at the level of a laboratory or a center, but it's definitely not university-wide.
Okay. Well, that looks like that's all the questions in our Q&A. So again, I want to thank you for such a thorough presentation and a big thank you to our attendees this morning. And if we have no other questions, that's all I saw in the Q&A and in the chat. Again, Dr. Robin Broussard is available. She has her information and phone number on this slide. So please reach out to her to assist you with your export control needs. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome.